Chris Hensley is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member of FINRA SIPC, investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Houston First Financial Group are not affiliated.
The Houston Midtown chapter of the Society for Financial Awareness presents Money Matters with your host, Christopher Hensley.
Good morning, everybody. You're listening to KPFT Houston Money Matters. I'm Chris Hensley. The time is now 11 a.m. We've got a great show lined up for you today. You know, when it comes to money, emotions can be one of the most powerful magnets to either pull us towards it or to push us away. They can be our friend and they can be our enemy when it comes to making right and efficient choices about your money. Our guest today, Christine Luken, is the author of the book, Money is Emotional, Prevent Your Heart from Hijacking Your Wallet. Please stay tuned. Keep listening as we will be doing a deep dive into this topic. If you are a longtime listener, you know we always reserve just the first few moments of the show to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the Houston and the Gulf Coast area when it comes to financial literacy. So, actually, the calendar, we don't have much stuff going on. I have a couple of seminars coming up, actually, the beginning of January. I want to say next Saturday, we're going to be doing a Social Security Basics talk. And then Wednesday, we're going to do a Texas teacher retirement system for the state pension talk. Those are always free and open to the public. So I think last month we did one at the library and then one at Saltgrass, and then this month we switched the same topics, just switched up the locations. So we'll be doing that as well as rolling out some new seminars for 2020 around Medicare and healthcare decisions that need to be made post-retirement, after you've retired and after you've turned off your paycheck. But instead of giving you kind of an update on the calendar, I wanted to use just the first few minutes of the show to remind you, because we are the very last episode of the year, or the last couple of weeks here of the year for 2019. And so anything that we would want to do proactively for the new year, this is our opportunity to do that. So I want to remind people about the kind of end of when we talk about taxes. Again, I'm not a CPA, so always consult a tax expert. But there are some things that we know that when we go to see the tax guy in April, sometimes it's too late, and they're basically just doing tax preparation. They're helping us put kind of a snapshot together of what we've done the prior year. So trying to be proactive on taxes, anything that you would want to do, you'd want to do proactively, and it would take place in the year prior to that. So here we are the last couple of weeks. Some of the things that in my profession that we can think about are tax loss harvesting. So if you have any stocks or equities that you've taken losses on, you have the ability to most of the time to write that off. And so you would want to really, this is the kind of the last chance when we talk about deadlines of beating that tax loss deadline. You have until December 31st to harvest any tax losses and or offset any capital gains. It may be advantageous to time sales in order to maximize tax benefits this year or next. We may also want to book gains and offset with any losses. So it's just that kind of a reminder, kind of that what should be on your radar. Looking at where you are at the end of the year is always a good thing to do. And then your RMDs, your minimum required minimum distribution. So this really is only applicable to people that reach 70 and a half years of age. Once you reach that age, if you have any qualified dollars, so IRAs, retirement accounts, that is the age that the IRS or the government has decided you have to take. Even if you don't need the income, we require you to go ahead and start pulling some small amount of distributions off of those accounts, so that we know that you're going to pay taxes on those distributions. And so this is the time to look at that. The reason this one comes up to be on your radar as a big deal is because there is a stiff and heavy penalty if you do not take your required minimum distribution. So this is for anybody who says, hey, I don't need my RMDs. I don't need the income off of it. You can, if you forget, be penalized as much as 50% of whatever you were required to take out of that account. So with that being said, if it's your situation that you don't need to make distributions, you would probably just want to take the minimum. Well, that's based on what they expect your life expectancy to be. So it turns out to be not a huge amount that you're required to take it out, but if you don't take it out, it can cost you as much as 50% penalty for doing that. So just a few things I wanted to get on your radar. With that, I do want to maximize our time with Christine because we've got Christine on the line here. Let's go ahead and punch her up here. Christine, are you there?
I sure am.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I usually will kind of introduce everybody the same way by sharing their bio with listeners. So I'd like to do that now so that the listeners can get to know you just a little bit better. Christine is the financial lifeguard and founder of the Financial Dignity Movement. You're a certified financial counselor, a speaker, and the author of Manage Money Like a Boss, a financial guide for creative entrepreneurs. And the book that we're kind of going to do a deep dive in today is Money is Emotional, Prevent Your Heart from Hijacking Your Wallet. You have a degree in accounting, and you are an active member of the Financial Therapy Association. You've got 11 years of financial counseling experience, both with couples and divorcing women. Christine teaches financial professionals and money coaches all over North America about the emotional side of money, and you also live in the Cincinnati area. Christine, might you be able to share something about yourself that's maybe outside of the bio?
Oh, that's outside of the bio. So, my birthday is actually coming up in a couple of days, and I will be 46, and I am going roller skating.
Oh, nice.
With my nieces and nephews because I love to roller skate. And everybody's like, aren't you afraid of hurting yourself? And I say, nope, I am great at roller skating. I have been since I was like 10 years old, and that hasn't changed.
That's awesome. Well, happy early birthday then.
Thank you.
A lot of times you get shafted because it's around Christmas time.
I know.
You get your Christmas presents, and then people forget about your birthday. So happy early birthday there. Well, so this book, Money is Emotional, Prevent Your Heart from Hijacking Your Wallet. You already had the first book. Why did you write this book?
Well, I wrote this book because I realized that there was something missing out there in the personal finance world. There's a lot of books out there on budgeting, on debt reduction, on how to save more money, and yet people aren't doing it. They're not doing it in the numbers that they should be doing it. And so it felt like that there was some kind of disconnect. And I know from personal experience what that disconnect is. It's the emotional side of money. And so just a little story, which I tell in great detail in the book, about where I started from, because I hit financial rock bottom in my late 20s, despite having my accounting degree. And it was not because I didn't know what to do. In fact, I was working for a multi-million-dollar company as their staff accountant. So I was helping to prepare budgets, manage finances for this large company, and yet I was bouncing my own checks at home. And it was because I was engaged to a guy who had terrible money habits. He was in and out of jobs, in and out of jail, and I thought if I loved him enough that he would change. And he did. He got worse. So by the time I was 26, 27 years old, I I realized that I needed to get out of this relationship. And yet I literally had no money to leave the relationship. Thankfully, I didn't marry him, although I did have a wedding dress hanging in the closet. Had a deposit down on the hall, and, I went and talked to my dad, and of course, he saw the writing on the wall. He knew this guy was, trouble. And so he said, you know what, why don't you come stay with me for a couple months? I'm not going to pay your bills for you. I'm, not going to lend you money, but I'm going to give you a safe space where you can regroup and get back on your feet. And so that was exactly what I needed. And yet it was also a very shameful time in my life, because I was someone who should have known better. And yet here I was with, zero savings, collections. I was behind on my car payment. If it was possible for your credit score to be negative, mine probably was. I mean, it was really bad. And I learned a lot from that situation. And I would like to pass that learning on so people don't have to experience those lessons as painfully as I did myself.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that story, because I think with many listeners, some of the things that you just mentioned kind of ticked a box for me. I just met with a client yesterday who was having me do some Social Security coordination, and then we got to the end, and she was single and she was divorced, and then we got to the end of it, and she was like, well, if I get married, how does that change? Well, it completely changes. It 100% changes what we just talked about, because there's the idea of couples, and there's one side of a financial story, and then there's a second side of it. And so your personal story, where you were corporate staff accountant, and then you ended up making changes in your life and kind of having to regroup. In the book, you start out, you talk about the battle for your money begins in your mind. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this was one of the things that I realized, going through this process myself, and then as I became financially healthy, starting to reach out and help other people, which eventually led to this being my career path, is I realized how important the emotional side of money is. And it was very interesting, because I discovered just recently that science has proven that the moment of decision happens in the same part of our brain that processes emotion. And it was interesting because they found that out completely by accident. So they were studying these stroke patients who were very high functioning. The only damage they had was in the part of their brain that processed emotion. So they had a hard time expressing emotion, and they had a hard time interpreting emotion in other people. So they were doing this group study with them, and they brought in lunch, and they said, oh, do you want a chicken sandwich or do you want a hamburger? And these people could literally not make a decision at all, none of them. And that's when they realized, oh, my gosh, this is where the moment of decision happens, in this same part of the brain that processes emotion. And so when financial professionals tell people to take the emotion out of their financial decision-making, they're literally asking people to do something impossible. And so we don't have to be disheartened by this, because sometimes when I tell people this, they feel like, oh, gosh, well, then it's just hopeless, right? I can't control this. But the truth is you can control it, because once we understand this, then we can actually harness the power of our emotions. And we can also learn some tricks to short-circuit some of those negative emotions that might be holding us back. And, I'm just so fascinated by the subconscious mind and all of these things that play into our behavior with money. So I'm sure you've heard of the term your money stories or your money narratives.
Yes,
And,
I have, but listeners may not. You might want to share that with them as well.
yeah. And so essentially what that is it's your early experiences with money. And typically it is things that your parents have said to you or other adults with authority in your life when you're a young child. It's very interesting because the brain waves of young children are different than our brain waves. Children who are 7 and younger, their brain waves are what's called a theta state, which is actually the same state of brain waves when you are under hypnosis or right before you fall asleep. And what happens is when you're a young child, the things that people say to you, you don't have the ability to judge them as true or false. You just take them as the truth. And they become embedded into your subconscious as the truth. And so even though as an adult you may, leave the nest, so to speak, those early experiences can keep us trapped in these self-destructive cycles, and we might not even be aware of it.
So that's actually one of the things that you talk about in the book. You kind of dive into the money stories there, and that's a lot of people don't even think about that. They're not aware of that, and that's kind of before you even get out of the gate. There's some things going through your story there that may be holding you back, or maybe not. They may be helping, but a lot of times they might be holding you back.
Right.
You also talk about, one of the things you talk about is money victim or money victor. What do you mean by that?
Well, so psychologists call this the locus of control. And so what that essentially means is, do you feel like you have control over the outcome in your life, or do you feel like that events out there are dictating the circumstances of your life? And so when we have a victim mentality about our finances, we essentially attribute the state of our finances to everything that's going on outside of us. So we might say things like, well, it's the economy, and my boss won't give me a raise. Prices are high. So-and-so took advantage of me. I lent my brother $500, and he never paid me back, right? And so there's all of these excuses out there. And the problem is when we attribute power to the things out there, then it basically makes us feel powerless to change anything. And so I had to make that shift myself. When I crashed and burned financially, and like I said, it was pretty bad. I mean, I owed payday lenders money, and it was just not a good situation. And it would have been very easy for me to feel sorry for myself, for me to say, you know what, it's my ex's fault. He spent our rent money on weed, which he did. Those were all things that actually happened, but nothing changed until I said, I am in control of my finances. I have the power to say no. I don't have to go along with the stuff that he wants to do. Of course he's going to be unhappy with that. And that was, when I took my power back and said, this is how it's going to be. I am in control of my finances. Then that's when the growth happened. Because once you say, the control is with me. No, I cannot control those things out there, but I can control how I react to them. I can control what I do with my dollars every day. And that was really where the change happened. One of my favorite speakers has a quote that says, you can be pitiful or you can be powerful, but you cannot be both.
I love that.
And so I really took that to heart. I was just like, wow. Sometimes it does feel good to sit in our pity party, but what really feels good is to take back your power and say, I have control over this, and I'm going to do something about it.
I love that. We're speaking with Christine Luken. She is the author of the book Money is Emotional, Preventing Your Heart from Hijacking Your Wallet. If you're driving, you don't have to jot this down right now. We will have a link to it on the podcast, but you can find out more by going directly to the website, www.moneyisemotional.com. That'll take you to the website for the book. Christine was just talking about we talked about her term money victim or victor, and when you were talking about that, you talked about sometimes when these bad things are happening to people, their excuses are out there. They're external, and so they say, well, this person did this or that happened to me. But one of the downsides is when positive things happen, you've gotten that habit of pushing it out. Everything's outside of me and so in turn, it's hard to step up and take credit for the good stuff. And so you kind of have to, you have to retrain your mind and think differently, especially when it comes to finances. The second part of the book, you talk about the budget as really being a key to financial health. What can you share with us about that?
Yeah, and so it's interesting because when I do my next version of the book, I am going to take the word budget out of there, and I'm going to replace it with something what I feel is more empowering. And I have come to call the plan a prosperity plan versus just a budget. Because there's so much negative connotation around the budget, right? When people hear that word, they think it's all about deprivation and I'm not allowed to have any fun, and I'm going to have to eat beans and rice and sell my nice car. And it really doesn't have to mean any of those things. It really is about a spending plan and planning your spending out ahead of time. And so when I'm working with my clients, the first thing I tell them is, if your spending is out of control, there is no way that you are going to be able to make any headway paying down debt or building up your savings. That has to come first. Getting control of your spending. And it doesn't have to be super hard, and it doesn't have to be restrictive. I mean, a lot of my clients are high-income earners. Most of my clients make six figures. And yet, it's very easy for spending to creep up as the income creeps up, so that they're still in that spot of, wait a minute, I keep getting these raises, but I still have debt, and I'm really not saving that much. What's going on? And so it really is being mindful about spending, and that's essentially what a budget does for you, is it helps you to be mindful about your spending so you can make better choices in the moment. And so I recommend that all of my clients use some kind of online spending tracker. There's several that are free. The one that I particularly use with my clients is called AskZeta.com. But there's also Mint.com, and a lot of banks have a spending tracker already built into the online banking so that you can see right on your phone exactly how you're doing versus your goals, and you can make better choices in the moment.
I love that. You mentioned ultimately a very practical recommendation when people are looking to track their expenses. There's online help available, possibly from the bank that you're already banking with. A lot of times they will have ways that you can download them into Excel spreadsheets and classify the expenses. But separately from that, we're in an age where Mint is one. When I go out and talk about budgeting, it's free. We don't get paid by Mint for recommending it. But as it stands right now, I've had a lot of people really like the idea of plugging your bank accounts in there and being able to track the expenses. And so that's one that I hear a lot of. That came from you mentioned that tip. But that came from you talking about what you like to call not a budget, but a prosperity plan. And you also talked about a spending plan, and really just the idea of getting control of your spending, being mindful of where each and every dollar is going, versus just kind of burying your head in the sand and not wanting to know.
Right.
Feeling overwhelmed. Let's talk about, and we don't have too much time. We've got about 6 minutes left before the end of the show. The book, you go into depth into so much different things here. The next section that you talk about is living debt free. So we're gonna hit the fast forward button and say that we've got our prosperity plan under control, because I imagine that's the first step.
Right.
Once you've done that, tell us about living debt free.
Well, the way I like to describe debt, and the analogy that I like to give so that people can really understand it, is, when you're carrying debt, it's almost like carrying around a dumbbell. And so if you're carrying around a small amount of debt versus your income versus your net worth, then that's going to feel like carrying around like a 1 or 2 pound weight. And so if I gave you that weight and I said, I want you to carry this with you all day long. You can put it in your briefcase, you can put it in your backpack, whatever. Most people, that wouldn't feel too strenuous to be carrying around, 1 or 2 pounds of weight. But if you're carrying around a large amount of consumer debt, especially unsecured debt, like credit card debt, that can feel more like carrying around a 25-pound or a 50-pound weight everywhere that you go. And that's going to make even the most simple things, like tying your shoe or walking down the street, feel really hard. And the same is true with debt. So I'm not that crazy money guru that's going to jump out of the bushes with a big pair of scissors and make you cut up your credit cards. A credit card can be a payment method, but it can also be a debt machine. And it's really up to the person who's using it. So, we need to take some care in using debt. And there's certainly different types of debt that are, more advantageous than others. Certainly if you're taking out a loan for an asset like a house, or you're going to buy a business or something like that, that's a good use of debt. But, the position that I was in when I hit financial rock bottom, owing payday lenders money, I had one of those loans, I call them like the strip mall financiers, where, you're paying 30% interest, and they say things like, well, we don't make loans to credit scores, we make loans to people. And it's like, yeah, why don't you just take my firstborn too, right? So, it's not a matter of never having any debt, but it is being wise and cautious about it, and also going into it having a plan for paying it off.
So I like that, having a plan to pay it off. You talked about a bunch of different things here when we talked about debt. We talked about, if you've got just a little bit of debt, it may not seem that bad. You compared it to kind of walking around with a 2-pound dumbbell or a 1-pound dumbbell versus having a large bucket or a large amount of unsecured consumer credit debt, like credit card debt. That's more of like having a 25-pound or a 50-pound weight that you're just carrying around. It could be a roadblock to many of the things, and we don't have time. We've got 2 minutes to get, but as I'm looking through the book, you get into things like the mortgage and the student loans and the car payments, and
right.
What I want to ask you is to go into the credit score and where that plays into it, but we've just got 1 minute left. So I don't think I want. I think it's probably a good place to stop, because one of the things you mentioned was predatory lenders, and people falling in that trap of the payday loans and paying hundreds of percent of usury tax lending fees that go into the hundreds of percent of normal interest rates, even more than what you expect from high rate credit cards. And so these things can be very, very bad. And really be a monkey wrench. The book is Money is Emotional. The website moneyisemotional.com. Christine, thank you so much for talking with us today. In the last 30 seconds here, do you have a thought that you'd like to leave the listeners with?
Well, actually, I would love for them to download the first 3 chapters of the book, to go to moneyisemotional.com and do that.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Money Matters Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, visit us on the web at www.moneymatterspodcast.com. Drop us a line on SpeakPipe on the right-hand corner. It will receive any voicemails, questions, thoughts, concerns that you have about the show. In addition to this, we recently launched a Patreon campaign. Click on the Donate Now tab to hit the tip jar and find out what Patreon's campaign is all about.